with that, let's talk about Svelte. So if you have no idea what Svelte is, you just walk in this workshop, no clue what's happening. Svelte is a JavaScript framework used for building UIs. So one of the big problems in modern web development is that building interactive sites is always something of a challenge. The tools that vanilla JavaScript gives you for dealing with things like reactive state. So when some data changes, the UI needs to change in a corresponding way, right? An item is added to my array. Now there needs to be a new item, new list item in my list on the screen displaying. The way you traditionally handle this is you basically you have to handle it all yourself. So you would make a function that's like, okay, when this button is clicked, update the array, and then also remember to update the actual visual representation of that data. And this can work fine for very simple things. But as you start to scale things up and maybe you have multiple different views on the page that all rely on the same data, this sort of approach of just manually remembering, okay, anytime the state updates, I need to go and update all the data on the screen, starts to become pretty onerous, and you can run into a lot of bugs and problems with that. And so because of that, there's been many JavaScript frameworks to try to deal with this. And one of the most influential is React. If you looked into JavaScript frameworks at all, this is definitely the one to learn. It's super in demand in terms of hiring. It's the main thing where people will reach to. It's kind of the go-to. There's lots of other options. Today, we're going to look at Svelte, which is a little different. It has some concepts that are similar to React, but it's actually built to try to fix some of the problems with React. Because React was built by Facebook, I want to say it's almost 10 years ago, maybe more. And some of the things that they do have some impacts on performance or have some unintuitive outcomes. Sometimes the syntax can be a little bit difficult to wrap your head around. So Svelte was designed to kind of be very simple to get started with. I find it super great for hackathons and projects like that. So if you don't need to build something that's going to, scale up to lots and lots of people, and you don't necessarily need the most battle-tested, most tested framework possible. The 1.0 has come out recently. So I was hesitant to recommend it maybe a year ago because it was still in beta, but the 1.0 came out, it is officially stable. So there's not going to be a lot of breaking changes. So it's actually a really great time to get into it. And it's really good for, I'd say, for hackathons, for little personal projects. You can even use it in production. Some companies do that, but it's definitely kind of an up-and-coming framework compared to React and some of the other contenders. So I just want to do a quick kind of overview of some of the concepts of Svelte. I'm just going to point you to their docs. They actually have, so they have a nice docs page, which basically has everything you need, like all in one page. But something that I really like about Svelte is just they have a great tutorial. So I'm not going to walk you through this tutorial. We're going to build a different thing. But if you walk through this tutorial, even just using this as a reference, they basically have it's super interactive. So like, say you want to learn how to do an if block, right? Which is how you display something conditionally. You can go to this tab. It'll show you, like, here's an example. Here's before code, and you click this show me. It will add the after code, and you can actually test the code that they give you down here below. So it's one of the nicest documentation experiences I've seen. I wish more frameworks would do this sort of thing. But yeah, this is a great resource if you're trying to learn Svelte. Svelte.dev has all their main stuff. They also have some beta docs, but I haven't used those myself. Okay, so let's just get started with setting up a project. So what you'll need is, if you don't have Node.js installed, so you can check that you have Node if you run node -- version. I'm running the latest stable release. But pretty much anything relatively recent should work. If you have 16 or later, you'll definitely be fine. 14 or later probably would still be okay. If you don't have Node.js, you can totally just grab it at nodejs.org or through your package manager. I recommend, if you don't use a package manager for installing software for things, you should do that. So if you're on macOS, the main one I'd recommend is Homebrew. That's what I'm going to be using. If you're on Windows, there's a couple of interesting options. I think Chocolatey is one of the big ones. I've used Scoop in the past, and there's also a built-in one called Winget that's kind of newer, but it's officially supported by Microsoft. If you're on Linux, your distribution should ship with one, and that should be fine. And you can just get software straight from that repository. You don't need to worry about getting these installed. You can also just download the latest release from the site, but then it will automatically update, and you might run into some problems. So that's that. Once you have that installed, shouldn't take too long to run through the install for that. We are going to do npm create
Wait, did you say
latest, and then just give
What?
a notification. So I'm just going to call this to do at Rob. So you give a file name. It's going to ask you some questions. You can just hit enter to say okay. And this is their command line to basically get a project up and running. So if you use something like create React app or Vite before, don't use create React app anymore. It's kind of bad, but you should use Vite. But if you've used something like Vite or create React app before, where you can just kind of run a command, it'll set up the whole project. You don't need to worry about any of the setup stuff. This is what you should be doing. So Svelte has a similar thing. This is how you do it. So yeah, and we're just gonna, it gives you a couple of interesting options. Like if you want to build a library, you can do this. They have a demo app that's pretty cool, but we're just gonna get the skeleton that has the bare bones, nothing, because we're gonna end up deleting everything anyway, and making our own. Svelte has full support for TypeScript and type checking with JavaScript as well. So if you just want to write JavaScript and write comments that give you types with JSTOC, it's a thing you can do. I'm going to use TypeScript. You can also add ESLint, Prettier, Playwright, which is a basically a way to do some more testing. And then VI tests or VTest is a unit testing framework, but we're not going to add any of those things today. So what you need is skeleton project, TypeScript, and then we don't need any of the other stuff. So I'll just say, okay, you made this project, that's great. Go ahead and head into that folder that you created and get npm install kicked off. Probably going to take a minute. If you're using yarn or pnpm or something else, use the appropriate commands for those. Once we get that started, we can actually go ahead and just get the development server going. So the way you do that is you do npm run dev. So you may have seen npm start for some projects, but I think a lot of projects are going to npm run dev. And then it should give you a link to localhost that will open up a page with a very basic kind of project. Let me blow some of these things up so a little bigger. It's npm install. What it does is it will install, the way npm actually works is that it generates a, let me move some stuff. It generates a file called package.json. And package.json is a project file for JavaScript. So it defines what other libraries do you need to pull in, what other code do you need in order for this to run. So you can see all this like Svelte core stuff is defined in your dependencies here. And when you run npm install, basically what it does is reads this file and installs the actual code for this. That's sort of a summary. Let's see. Chat says, doesn't work with Node 14. That's on me. Okay, you downloaded Node.js, not sure what to do. Okay. So if you're still trying to get Node.js installed, once you download if you download the Node.js from the site, I'm not sure what do they give you. They give me a package file, but I'm on macOS. So if you're on Windows or something else, they should give you an executable you can run, and that will allow you to install Node.js. And then what you need to do is open up a terminal. I typically have a very command line focused workflow, but if you use VS Code, you can just use the VS Code terminal. There's no problem. And you should run node-h version to make sure that everything's properly set up. If you don't have that set up, what you're going to need to do is maybe add it to path. So in order for your terminal to find the program, you have to add it to a variable called path, which like defines all the places where your operating system will look for programs that are installed and can be run. So that might be something uncut. Yeah, it should just do this when you run the installer, but I've seen people have issues with it, especially depending if you have some like WSL setup or you ran, it's like an old version of Node. You know, there's all kinds of things that can happen. Yeah, I really recommend running either the latest LTS or the latest release. So doesn't work with Node. Yeah, I think Node 14 is still technically LTS. You can 100% do this on VS Code. What that'll look like, I'll show you briefly, is you just, you'll just grab up here in the top, you'll see a thing for terminal, new terminal, and you can open a little terminal here. And then you just run the commands inside there. I'm just running them in just a regular shell. If you guys run into more issues on Zoom with that stuff, let me know. But we do need to continue moving, so I'm going to keep rolling. Just let me know, keep me informed on your progress. Okay, so once you've got that going, hopefully, with any luck, you got Node installed, you managed to get the Svelte project initialized. And if you're a little behind on this, all of this stuff is in the I believe it's in the documentation. So if you look at the top here, it will tell you this command that we were running to install is all in the svelte.dev/docs. You can find it all there. So once we've actually got this running, let's take a look at kind of the directory structure. So
once we get to npm run dev, what do we do after?
yes. So the question is, once we get to npm run dev, what do we do after that? So once you get npm run dev, you should see something like this, like Vite version, whatever, and you'll see this link to localhost. You want to open that link up in your web browser, and that will take you to your application. All we're doing here is setting up a hot reload cycle so that what we're going to be able to do is we make edits and they immediately appear in our browser, and we don't have to like recompile, like it will just automatically do all that for us. It makes it much quicker in terms of developing. For web development, I'd say this is the gold standard. If you're using a system that doesn't let you have hot reload, it's probably not the best. In some other places like mobile development, backend, some of these things are less established, but it's really something you want to do. So if we just take a look at the directory structure, you can see there's like a README, node modules, all the kind of normal JavaScript stuff. If you haven't seen this before, don't worry. Node modules is just where all your library code lives. So this is where the Svelte compiler and all the Svelte code it lives that we're importing. Package.json is the list of all of our dependencies and defines our project. Package lock.json is related to package.json. And there's some configuration files. But the main thing that's interesting to us is the source folder. And if you take a look in there, you'll see there's an app HTML. And then inside of this routes folder is actually the code that we're going to be running. So if we open up plus page.svelte, that is the page that is the base page. It's kind of like your index HTML if you've written any HTML like that. So you can see all the stuff maps. Is there anyone here who's not familiar with HTML? It's pretty simple if you're not. You basically have tags that are defined inside these angle brackets. And then you can have text or other content inside of it, and everything can nest. And so we have an H1, which is a heading 1. That's why it's big and bold. Then we have a paragraph, which is p tag. We have a link here. And then we have close p tag. But I'm just going to go ahead and delete this guy because we don't need it and save the file. And if you notice, it'll immediately reload. So that's all gone. Don't need to worry about that. And then let's change this inside here to be something that's more appropriate for what we're doing. So we're going to be building a little to-do app today. If we have time, which we'll see, we might try to add the ability to have like network connectivity so multiple people can use it at the same time. But if not, we will just develop it locally and just kind of do a little showcase of all the things Svelte has to offer. So to get started, I would like this to be centered. So some of this stuff is going to be like Flexbox and some web development things. I'm going to breeze through it because it's not Svelte specific, but if you have questions, feel free to ask me. One thing that's really nice about Svelte is when you're trying to style things, that has a nice little style syntax. So what we're going to do to try to center this, because we want this to be in the center. The way I usually do this is create a div container, and then we'll use Flexbox on it. And so what we're going to do is create a flexible box. So first we'll set a class name for our div. This just gives us a way to identify this particular div. So I'm just going to call this container. And then if you want to actually add CSS to your project in Svelte, you can just write a style tag inside of the file. So you notice we have the special extension .svelte. This is not an HTML file, even though it may look very similar. It's not CSS or anything like that. It's a Svelte file. And basically in a Svelte file, you can have regular HTML. It's an HTML superset. So anything that's valid HTML is valid in Svelte. And the way you can apply styles is just using a style element. So we'll just write some CSS here. We're going to do display flex. I want the flexibility to be up and down because I want to be able to have basically a list of items going from top to bottom. So do flex direction column. And then to center the items, we can use align items center. And so notice that'll give us items aligned like this. And if we add more things in the list, you'll get this. So that's the easiest way to center something. If we did a row, I think this confuses a lot of people, so I'll just briefly talk about it. If you do flex direction row, it flexes in the other way. So instead of the box going top to bottom, by default, it will go left to right. And this is not what we want, right? As we get more items, we will kind of want to go down. So we'll stick with the column. All right. So it's pretty good. Got that working. Now, what are we going to need in our to-do app? We're actually going to want to be able to have to-dos that we can list out. But in order to do that, we're going to need some way to create the to-dos, right? So I guess maybe what we should do first is let's define what a to-do should look like. We can just do a very basic thing. Let's just do an unordered list with list items. So you use the UL tag to create basically a bullet point list and then list items. So we can do this to do one. And then just add some more items like this. And if you save that, you should get something like this. So maybe this is what we're going to start with, and then we can make it look pretty in a minute. Now that we have this, so right now we've basically just written regular HTML. If you don't know HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, we've written 0 JavaScript. All of this stuff in the div, this is all just regular HTML. And the style is not necessarily, you can put style tags into a page in regular HTML, but it's not recommended. When you do it in Svelte, they actually compile it to be something different that is recommended. So even though you might have heard like, oh, don't use inline style tags, this is a bad idea, this is fine. And so we can just write our styles right here. This is basically just HTML and CSS. What we're going to do next is we want to have a way to actually add items to this list dynamically, right? We don't just want it to be a hard-coded list of to-dos. This doesn't help anyone. And so what we need some way to actually input, like what do we want a new to-do to be? So we'll just use an input element, and we'll use type text. So what this gives you is a basic text box. And this is when we're starting to get into some JavaScript and Svelte-isms. And this is actually something I really like about Svelte. So to add JavaScript to a page, you just write a script tag. And this probably, if you do come from just a regular HTML, CSS, JavaScript background, this is something that will feel very familiar because you can add style tags to your HTML. You can add script tags to your HTML. And in frameworks like React, this is not really how you normally do things. You have to really be familiar with JavaScript, which is not necessarily bad. But if you are familiar with kind of the core web technologies, I feel that Svelte is a very direct mapping from those. Like it's probably going to feel very comfortable. And so we can just write a script like this and we can make variables. So maybe one of the most basic things, we could just have like a to-do that's like hello. And then we can use this variable inside by using curlies. So this is also similar to what you can do in React. If you want to take a value that's a variable from your script, and you want to actually, because if we just say to do down here, we'll just get to do in our output. But if we wrap in the curlies, then it knows, oh, you're referring to the actual variable. So you get that interpolated straight into the line. And if we update this, this will also update, which is great. And so what we need to do next is give a way that, okay, we're going to type things in here. We want to add a new to-do. So the way I typically do this is just add a button. So we have an input, let's make a button. And the inner button, we need to say like something so that it has, otherwise it will just render as like nothing because it's too small. So we've got add to do. Okay. And let's add some styles to this. So something else you can do that is not typically recommended, but is super nice in Svelte is you can use just the name of a tag if you don't want to apply a class. So for divs, like I know I'm going to use a lot of divs, so I usually put a class name on a div, right? That's why you see this dot container and this class equals container. But for input, since we only have the one input, we can just use this input as and say, okay, for the input, we want to style it in this way. So let's add some margin bottom and maybe one rem, if that looks good. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And when we actually do this, this will not apply to every input. So in normal HTML and CSS, if you load this into your CSS file and you say input margin bottom 1 rem, every single input anywhere in your project is going to have this applied. So this is why people say don't do this, because as soon as you add another input, it's going to be screwed up. But in Svelte, these will actually be scoped to your local file. So if you have another file and you use input there, it automatically will generate. If you actually take a look at the generated stuff like we do inspect element, right click inspect, you can see on the input that there's this class, this like basically random ID that's added to that. And so it doesn't collide with any other ones. And so you know that that'll be there. And this is just nice, I find, because then you don't have to make up a bunch of class names for things that you only have one of in a file, especially if your component only has a few things. It's a lot easier to just get going with your styling. Okay, so we add that. That looks pretty good. We have a button. So how do we actually add a click handler to the button? One thing I would like to point out in Svelte is that you can use anything that's in regular JavaScript, you can use. And this is one advantage I found that's been great about it. So if you have a library like that's like some kind of, like if you want to use jQuery in combination with Svelte, you can do that. If you want to just include a tag at the top of the page that loads in a script, you can do things like that. All that's supported, which is not typically supported in React. And so if you want to do this the standard way of just saying, oh, let's set an ID on here of, hello, and then we're going to call document.getElementById, hello. You can, and then add event listener. You can totally do things this way. This is not what we're going to do because it's not the nicest way to do it. But if you want to do things this way, you have libraries that rely on being able to directly reach into your DOM. That's super useful. So, but in this case, we're just going to use the onClick attribute. So it gets rid of this ID. And this is a little different from React and some frameworks, but you put a colon in between. Instead of doing in React, you usually have something like onClick like this. But in Svelte, we just do on::click. So it's a little different. And then inside here, we need to give a function, basically a block of code that can be called when this gets clicked. And so I'm just going to do a console log to make sure it's working. All right, and this arrow, I apologize for the rendering. I use a custom font for this, but this is just an equal sign and a greater than, and it makes it look like an arrow.
Should it be a dash? Set?
No. It's just an equal sign and a greater than. I'm just saying if you look, when I hover over it, is it big enough over there too? Yeah. When I hover over it, you can see it's an equal sign and a greater than, but when I leave, like it just makes it into one glyph. And then sometimes that confuses people. I really should get rid of it when I'm doing workshops, but I always forget to. Okay. And let's click this button and see if it works. So if we go, you can basically go from open up your DevTools. If you never opened up DevTools before, it's not hard. You just on your page, just hit F12. You should get DevTools. Or this is for Firefox. It might be different in Chrome. I don't remember. You can also get to it usually from this hamburger menu. You should see something like Open DevTools buried somewhere in here. And you see we get our hello. So that's pretty good. If we click it more times, you can see this number right here showing that hello was printed multiple times going up. Okay, great. We can print hello. So now what we want to do is when we click this button, we want to actually add this new to-do into DOM. So let's clear this out into, let's do this. So instead of having an inline functions are fine. I typically use them a lot, but when you start to get more code, it starts to make sense to extract those out. And what you can do is just give the name and then write a function in your script tag. So for our add to do, for now, it's going to be a function which takes 0 arguments and gives back. Well, what is it going to give back? It's not going to give us back anything. We just want to run some code. And what code do we want to run? So this is where we're going to start getting into some of the Svelte things. In order to actually render this out, we don't want to render a hard-coded list. We want to be able to basically map a list of things into those HTML elements. And so what we can do is let's make a list. So let's say to-dos equals empty array. And then here we can make a loop using this strange syntax. So you basically have hash each, and then you give the name of the list as, and then a name for each element. And then inside here, you give HTML that you want to be rendered with that. And let's see, why is it angry? Oh, it's not happy. TypeScript's not happy. So we can give this a type. Let's give this type string array. And oh, we can't use TypeScript because we're not in a TypeScript file. And so in order, by default, when you just say script in Svelte, it means JavaScript. If you want to add support for TypeScript, you just add lang equals TF to your script tag. And now it has full support for TypeScript. Super convenient. Okay, so now everything should be working. We have this to-dos list. Right now, there's nothing here because we're not iterating over it. But if we add some items here, like, let's see. Sure. GitHub Copilot gives us some suggestions. You can see that if we have items in here, those will be looped over and bound to this to-do, and then you'll make a list item out of it. And so, okay, this is pretty good. But what if we want to actually add items to this? So the way you normally append to a list is you just use .push. However, this in a lot of frameworks, this doesn't work. And this also doesn't work in Svelte because it's difficult there's no way to detect that like .push was called because that mutates the existing array. And so what you have to do in most frameworks is basically create a new array and then do an assignment. The way React handles this is you have to use like the use state hook and you basically call set state and then you make a new array, you call set state with the new array. When you call set state, React knows that it needs to update everything. So Svelte used to be like that, but it has a nice new syntax that's very convenient for this sort of thing, which is anytime you do an assignment to a variable, it basically triggers the same thing as set state in React. So what we can do is use this syntax to append. And what this does is it takes the old list of to-dos, ... basically says like copy all the items from that list into this list. And then we can add our new item, which is our new to-do or whatever, into here, and we do an assignment. And when you do this, it automatically will trigger everything to be reactive. So I guess it doesn't matter where we're typed because we're not reading out of this, but if we click add to-do, you can see it's updating that array and it will also update the DOM at the same time. And you don't have to call any like intercepted functions like set state or anything like that. So,
can you re-explain the all over list /group function each?
yes. So that's part of Svelte syntax. So this each part. This you have to do. What this does is it basically creates a loop in the HTML. So this right here, you do hash each, and then the name of an array. So this to-dos is this to-dos.
And then it says,
And-
for each element in to-dos as.
And we're going to name it as to do for this iteration and then give back what HTML you should have. So if you wanted to have something else, like say we don't care what the element is and we just want to say hello no matter what. If we do that and add items, it'll just be hello. So we can ignore that or say we want to do that and we want to concatenate, hello to this. Then you can do that and you'll get a similar thing. So does that make sense? Okay, it's just a loop. The syntax is a little bit obscure for sure, but the reason they do that is to make it just stand out from the rest of the HTML because it's not part of normal HTML. You cannot use this in HTML. This won't work in any other framework. This is something that's Svelte specific. Okay, so we have that. We have this ability to add to-dos. Now, instead of just adding new to-do here, what we really want to do is read the value out of this input text box and update to-dos with this. So what you would normally do in something like React is you would do, like you could set on change, but you basically make a function that would update, like you would say, okay, let's take in our event. Let's go update. We make a variable that could store, you would create some state that could store the value of what's in the input. And then every time there's a change, you would update that value. You can also do this in Svelte. That totally works. But a much more convenient syntax that does the same thing is the binding syntax. So you can basically get two-way binding like this. So you say bind : value equals, and then inside curlies, you put a variable. And then anytime that variable is updated, it will update the value of the input. And anytime the input, like the user types into the input, and that's update, it will update the value of the variable. So it's a two-way binding, right? If either one gets updated, the other one will get updated.
And it's every like keystroke as opposed to when you actually press enter.
Correct. It's every keystroke. And if we want to actually see this, We'll talk about what the syntax means in a minute, but we can do console.log input with this strange $colon in front of it. And this is a great way to debug things that are changing. So here, so you can still see that. But now if we go here, as we type, you can see that things are getting updated. I'll bring the code back up in a minute. But as you type, you can see that variable is being updated. Yeah, it gives you a very concise syntax for doing this, which I really like. And so, okay, what is this $colon? You might be wondering. So this is actually valid JavaScript. It's a labeled statement. They're very rarely used, but it has been in Svelte. They've basically co-opted it as a way to declare a reactive block of code. And so what this does is it will rerun the code after the $colon anytime any of the dependent variables change. So if we want to print out input whenever input changes, we just put this reactive here. If we don't do this, then what will happen is it will execute one time. You see the empty string, right? It'll execute one time on the first render. And then if we make changes later, it doesn't matter. Won't execute again. And this is all done. They do compile time analysis to figure all this out. So that's one of the reasons React, some of the APIs in React aren't as nice. This $colon is the same thing for my React people out there as your use effect. So a similar thing in use effect would look like this. Except it would be console log input. This is what you would do in React, would be this bottom guy. And you have to manually specify what the dependencies are for this to be recalled, because React is an entirely runtime framework. So even though we do often bundle and compile it, you can actually use it completely at runtime if you don't use JSX, which is their like custom HTML syntax. Whereas Svelte you can't do that. It is compile time. You have to run, this will run through a compiler before it ever executes. And that's how they'll basically mangle it into something that looks closer to that. But it gives you a very nice syntax to work with. So you can do all kinds of things with this. You can put if statements in here, right? So you could do, like say we only want to log it out if it's greater than 5, for example. So we can see, okay, nothing logged, nothing logged, nothing logged. We had a 6 thing, it's there. Now it's triggering. If we go below that, not triggering anymore. Question.
So with this $sign, is it like Python where you can only do like one thing where you have like could you put curly braces?
You can
do a bunch of stuff.
So you can, yeah, you can do just one. You can normally do just one thing, but if you wrap, you can make a block that you wrap in curlies and then do, a whole bunch of stuff. Right. You also can just do one every single time. I will say it might seem a little magical at first, and it is kind of magical. And if you want to get really into Svelte, you do have to kind of learn the edge cases. Like sometimes the order in which you have these statements execute can matter. If there's like dependencies between, like you have one of them that updates, like what you can do is give like computed values. So like maybe we want to have double input equals input plus input, right? We want to have a value that's essentially like, it's just like input, but it's just the same thing concatenated. So we can have computed values. If you have like change of computed values that have like complex a tree of what order they're executed in, then the order you have these can sometimes matter. And it makes sense how it works, but there's some subtle points there. But yeah, you could totally do something like this. And like we can just see, this is great. This is really great for computed values. So if you need computed values, it's super handy for this is very hard to do. It's harder to do things like this in React in such a nice way. So it's very convenient, and it's good for debugging. So if you want to debug something, just $console log, whatever you're trying to debug, typically will get you there. Okay, so we've got this. And then what we really want to do is, now that we've bound the value of this input variable from our input into this actual variable here, we can just use that as what we're going to append here. So now we can add our own things here. And maybe what we want to do also is clear this out so that after you type it to do, you don't have to worry about that again. So we can just do input equals nothing, and this will automatically update. Since it's bound to that other input, it will automatically update the input. If you're writing normal JavaScript, this would not work, right? You would have to specifically go and get a reference to that input element do input dot value equals just empty string and then update your state also. So Svelte is really nice in terms of keeping all that synchronized. So now we have a pretty like decent experience where we can make things. The next thing I want to do is, oh, we have a question.
Right.
No, please.
So if we wanted to do something like where you can enter key and it just submits it automatically, like you could definitely do that sort of form element, which is just like basic HTML. Would you still want to do that just like with your key listener if you didn't want to do a form? Or is there like some magical something?
Yeah, so there is, Svelte does have like nice, they try to offer nice support for if you want to have a JavaScript-less form experience. So if you want to rely on the form experience, they do offer things for that. I have not looked extensively at that. For something like this, what I would do if you want to have an enter is, yeah, I would just add a key listener. So you could just do, what is it? Is it on input or on change? I forget which one. They have like subtle differences and I forget which one is which, but basically you could do something like this and say, event dot, what is it? Key, no, current target dot, I forget what it is. But there's a, yeah, you can listen for the key. You just do it basically the normal way, similar to how you do it in React other places. That'll all completely work. Okay. So we've got this working. That's pretty good. Let's make it so that we can have a completed and a not completed. Because right now we can just add to-dos, which is great. But it'd be nice if we could like show some indication. Okay, here's what we still have to do. Here's what we already did. And maybe you could go back and forth. That would be nice, right? So the first thing we're going to need to do is add a checkbox to this guy. And so I'm going to stop using the unordered list with list items because it's not great for this. So I'm just gonna make a div class equals to-dos. And then let's make another div, and this can be class equal to do, just for one to do. And inside of this div, we don't want to just have the name, but we also want a checkbox. So I'm just going to put this in a span. If you're not super familiar with HTML, a span and div are just like wrapper elements. They have no semantic meaning in HTML. So they don't tell you anything about the content. They're just a wrapper element usually used for CSS styling, or just sometimes you need a container for something. And so you can, in a lot of cases, just have like text inside of a div or something like that. That's fine. But as soon as you have multiple children, I typically lean towards like, how you just use a span. Don't just leave content floating around like on its own with other like whole tags inside there. It's just, in a way, yes, but it's just like you can do this, right? You could have like an input and then you could have like text in here, but if it's just the text, I'd say, oh sure, okay, have the text of the child. But otherwise, I just typically say put a span there just so that, because HTML does have some white space dependent. Mostly it doesn't matter, but there's some places where white space matters, and if you use a span, like it will eliminate those problems. Whereas if you don't, then it's be like, oh, there was a space after the input, but before your text. And so it could be interpreted differently in some contexts. I forget the exact cases, but I've been bitten by it before. So just, that's why I usually wrap it in a span. And we're not going to do type equals text because that just gives us another box. We're going to do type equals checkbox. This is pretty good, but let's add it to do. It gives us a box. We can check. This is just what we need. Built in HTML. You don't need any custom stuff. So that's another thing I really like about Svelte is that it builds on existing web technologies. You don't have to go to npm and be like React checkbox and like npm install React checkbox and get something that works with React. You can just use regular HTML stuff and it empowers you to do that. And then also if you later want to migrate away from Svelte, sure, you'll have to get rid of things like these each loops, but majority of your code is just going to be plain old HTML that you can take to pretty much any framework, which I think is nice. Whereas migrating out of React is tougher because there's a lot of React specific things. Like in React, you may have seen people using class name, which they have to do to work around the fact that class is already reserved for like regular JavaScript classes, like in any object-oriented language. But because Svelte compiles things, we can just use regular class for CSS classes, which is a completely different meaning, but there's no complex there because it's all compiled. Okay, so we've got ourselves a checkbox. The reason I added these classes is because I want to add, like, we should add some space here. So let's add some margin top to this. Yeah, like 1 rem. Maybe. Two rem. No, there we go. Okay. That way you just have some space there. And let's see what happens if we add multiple items. Okay, that seems pretty okay. And then the last thing I would do is I just like to add a border sometimes to things. I think it just makes it look a little nicer. So we can do for our to-dos. Let's just add a border, a 1 pixel border. Yeah, maybe big red border. Oh, that actually looks terrible. We can fix this though. Part of the problem is now this input, since we have a new input, this is not great. So let's just go ahead and add a class to this guy here. Or what we actually can do is you can actually, a lot of people don't notice, but you can select by attribute also. So since we have that input is only a text input, we can do this input, this syntax is part of CSS, and this will only select text inputs. And because it's Svelte, it'll be scoped to only text inputs in this file. So if we make more files and other pages, it's not a problem, unlike it normally is. Okay. And then for to do, like, we can add some padding. Normally I go for like half a rem and 1 rem. And that looks pretty good. The difference is this one is, the first one I think is vertical and the second one, let's check. Yeah, the first one is vertical and the second one's horizontal. And if you do them, like if you only give one value, it applies the same to all, but 1 in all directions looks terrible. Even though it's even, it still looks terrible. So you usually go for something like this. And then it would be nice if there's like a little bit of space between these. So I'm going to add display flex to make another flex box. You really can do a lot with flex box. Another flex direction column because we want to go up and down. And then you can just use the gap property once you have a flex box. And maybe let's add 1 rem gap. That's a little bit much. So maybe like half a rem gap. That's pretty good. And then again, none of this is strictly necessary, but just border radius half a rem just to give a little bit of roundness. Did it work? Ah, there we go. All right. That's looking a little bit better. Maybe we also set min width to like 8 rem or something like that, just to give a little more space to each one. Okay. Don't worry too much about this. It's all CSS. It'll take you many months or years like me to learn. Even I am not a CSS expert, but I know enough to get around. If you want to use Tailwind, I typically recommend people to use Tailwind, especially when you're starting. I still use it. It's my go-to solution for CSS. You can add it with like 1 command to Svelte. It's like npx Svelte add Tailwind or something like that. Just look it up. But I want to show you what Svelte has built in, because a lot of frameworks do not build in any support for CSS. Like if you've used React, they explicitly say like, we do not provide a solution for CSS. You got to bring your own. So some people use style components, some people use CSS modules, some people use one big global CSS file with everything scoped. And it's fine, you can do your own, but Svelte tries to give you at least some defaults that are better than nothing. You can also, if you want to use preprocessors for CSS, you can do that just like you can use the lang. So if you want to use like SCSS, you can do lang equals SCSS in your style tag, and it will automatically, you might have to npm install the SCSS compiler, but it'll automatically use that as SCSS or Sass, or like there's any CSS preprocessors. Yeah.
That's a spell thing.
That's a Svelte thing. That does not work in regular HTML. So because it's not Sass and SCSS, all those things are not CSS. And so they compile the CSS. So you need a compiler tool to do that. But by Svelte just adds it so that when you type the lang, it will automatically handle the problems for you, which is nice. Okay. Oh, we lost chat. Oh no. There we go. That'll be smooth. Okay. All right. Zoom, hopefully you're still doing well. I haven't seen any messages, so I'm just going to assume everything's fine. All right. So this is pretty good. We can add to-dos now, and they look reasonably nice. Let's make another list. So what we want to do is like have a left list and a right list, basically, right? Like a not done and done. So I'm just going to copy paste. I know it's bad, but that's what I'm going to do. So now what we actually, the reason it adds two is because we have two lists. And what I want is them to be side by side. And so I'm just going to add another level of nesting with another div, another flex box. So take those two guys there. And I'm just going to call this, give this a 2-column layout. There's probably better names for some of these things, but I don't know. This is why I like to use Tailwind, because you don't have to make last names for all this stuff. Okay. And what is this going to be? This is going to be display flex. Flex direction, we want row. So it's already row by default. So we don't have to specify that because we want to go sideways. And then what we want is we want to have like basically even space between everything. And so what you can do is justify content space evenly. And what that will do is give you, in theory, is it a line? Maybe I need a line items. No, in theory, they should space it out. What is my problem here? No, you're correct. I need to do, yeah, you're right, with 100. Good call. Okay, let's try again. Yes, thanks for the suggestion. Okay, now we kind of get, it's not, to be honest, it's not the greatest responsive layout ever, because if you make it really big, it looks kind of dumb. It's like so far apart. But it's better than nothing. And that's what we're going for today. So, okay, it looks pretty good on my half screen anyway. Again, you can spend lots and lots of time with CSS making anything look pretty, but I want to focus on Svelte today. Okay, so we've got that. We've got two lists. And what we should do is make it so they're not both bound to the same list. Because right now we have this weird situation where we add items to the list and like it just displays on two. So you can sort of see like how the data binding works. Even though we only have one list, we can easily like reuse that list in multiple places. And if anything ends up getting updated, like it'll all the updates will synchronize through it, which is nice. But this is not really what we want to do. And so there's a few ways we could do this. We could make another list, like one list for finished, one list for unfinished, and just do it like that. But maybe that's a better approach, maybe not. We're going to use the $: syntax to create basically a computer list just because we can. Is this the best design? Maybe, maybe not. You can have your own thoughts about that, but we're going to do it differently. So what we're going to do is let's make an interface for our to-dos. And we're going to give them have like a name for the to-do, which is a string. This is the TypeScript thing. So this is not part of JavaScript, but if you want to define basically a shape, like some data that isn't just a built-in type, this is how you do it. So you say interface, we're going to make it to-do. So it has a name, which is a string. And then we're going to say, we could say completed. I'm going to do is done, which is Boolean. All right. And then let's change some of these types. So this should now be a list of to-dos. And we're getting a type error here because we cannot add this input is just a string. It's not a to-do. So how do we make it to-do? We just use object literal. So our name will be that input value. And then let's just say by default, not done. And now that we've done this, every to-do basically has an additional. So now instead of having just an array of strings, we have an array of structs where we have a name, each one has a name and whether or not it's done. And then to figure out, okay, let's have our finished to-dos is, we're just going to do a filter over that main thing and say, okay, we're going to take a to-do. If you haven't seen filter, the way filter works is you take an array, our to-dos array. Then you call this method .filter. And inside of .filter, you give a function. And that function should take one item from the array and tell you, okay, should it be in the new array? So we take one to-do, and if that to-do is done, it will be in the new array. If it's not done, it won't be in the new array. So that's what filter does. You can do a similar thing, like, you might be more familiar with like a loop idiom where you say, you loop through each item, like you make a new array, you loop through each item. If it is done, then append it to the new array. This does the same thing, but just in a much more concise way. Super nice. Okay, so we have this, and then let's also make one for unfinished. I love Copilot. Okay, there we go. All right. So we now have, and these will be automatically recomputed anytime to-dos changes, which is exactly what we need. So Svelte makes it very easy to get like derived data like this. And to be fair, you can do this in React pretty easily too, but I just thought this is a nice way to do it. Is this the best way to do it? Maybe you should just have 2 arrays and not worry about any of this business, but I thought it was cool. Okay. And then down here, we're going to change this. So instead of this first list, do we want to make the first one? Probably the first one should be like what we still have to do, right? So unfinished on the left, and then finished on the right. So we'll just rename those guys. So we're looping over those separately. And now, oh, object, that's not good. When you see this, it's because you're trying to like turn an object into a string. And our problem is that we have these to-dos. This is now not a string, this is a to-do. So when we make this span to-do, it's actually, this is a JavaScript object. It doesn't stringify automatically. We could do like JSON stringify, which would give us the string representation of it. But this is also not really what we want, right? And so you can, of course, just do dot syntax, but some people like to destructure. So I'm going to show this because it's another Svelte thing. So if you want to, if you've never used destructuring in JavaScript before, it's pretty cool. If you have an object, like let's say you have A, which has properties B. If you want to, you can of course always go like A.B to get access to that thing. But if you want to take something apart into its pieces, you can do this. So we can say, okay, A is on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, we want to destructure it into its constituent parts. And so C will end up being, what will happen is C will be 123 and B will be hello. There'll be new variables introduced. If you like that syntax, you can do it inside of each. So we can say, okay, take each one of these to-dos and just unpack it here into name and whether it's done. And some people like that. So either option, I'm going to do it like that just so that we have more interesting Svelte things, but you can, of course, just use dot syntax. And so then we update this guy. All right, pretty good. Let's see if it still works. Okay, now it works as expected. Now, how can we actually handle the data transitioning between the two sides? So what we need to do, because right now, if we check it, what we really want is we want it to go to the other side, but that doesn't happen. It just gets checked. It's not so great. So what we need to basically do is listen for the checked event. So when it gets checked, we need to update the state so that that's also constituent. You can do binds for this. So if you want to use bind, like I think it's also just bind value, you can do that. But two-way data binding starts to have, it's best used for simple cases. Like I would say the main use case for bind, if you're doing anything tricky, don't use bind. React explicitly doesn't allow you to do any two-way data binding because it leads to problems. Because the main issues that come up is if you have like A two-way bound to B so that they have to be kept synchronized when either changes. And then B is also bound to C. And then somehow indirectly C is bound back to A. You can get these circular loops that are like lead to an infinite loop when anything gets updated because everything is based on everything else. And if you try to do things like that, Svelte can detect it because the compiler can detect loops, which is nice. But yeah, it's a bad idea generally, and it can't always figure it out. And so React actually just doesn't let you do. They're all about unidirectional data flow. If you've heard that, they say you have a variable and the data only goes one way. You can't update back and forth. You can only update one way. And so that's what we're going to do here just to keep it simple. The other thing is that I'm going to show you how to make a component, even though I wouldn't even probably bother doing it for this. Because we only have 2 instances. A lot of people, anytime they see 2 copies of the same thing, will be like, oh, time to make a component. We need to abstract it. I'm typically a subscriber to writing wet code, WET, because a lot of people will be like, we should write dry code. And dry code stands for don't repeat yourself, right? Never repeat. There's actually a really interesting, I think it's Dan Abermom from the React team, he says use wet code, and I tend to agree, and it's write everything twice. So write it twice. Twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. So if you find yourself writing the same code a third time, time to make an abstraction. If you only have it twice, it's probably fine. The abstraction might not be worth what it's worth. But in this case, I just want to show you what a component looks like. So we're going to do it even though it's only twice. But in general, I would just leave this. There's nothing wrong with this code. So let's make a to-do component. So how do we actually make a component? We spent a lot of time just in this page.svelte file. What you can do is just make a components directory in your source folder. And then in there, let's make a component, and we can just, what do you want to call it? To do, maybe to do card, so it doesn't collide with our type name. To do card.svelte seems pretty good to me. And let's go back and grab this so we can see what we're doing. Okay, so in here, what we were working on before is a Svelte component. Oh, we have a question in the back.
Sorry, is the plus symbol in front of like the h.svelte important to .svelte?
No. So for components, you don't need it. It's a weird convention, but what the plus indicates is that it will be mapped, it will do routing. So we're using, there is like a basic version of Svelte you can get with like V. What I recommend is just go ahead and go for Svelte Kit, which is the full server-side rendering. You get all the goodies, and it does routing for you too. So in this case, we are not going off the main page, which is at just the route slash plus page. That's it's equivalent to index, basically. I don't know why they went with that. They could have just done index. But if you have nested folders in that routes folder, like you have source slash routes slash hello slash page.svelte, then if you go to your URL slash hello, it will open up that, it will load that file. So you get file system-based routing. That's why they do that. And the reason, part of the reason is that way you can have like type definition files or random whatever. Like I use a components directory. There's no reason you have to do this. If you just want to have random Svelte files or TS files or type definitions or whatever, like floating around in your routes directory, you can. And because they don't start with plus, they know that it's not something that's intended to be publicly accessible. Because before, this is a breaking change. A lot of people are mad, but before what they would do is everything would be publicly accessible. And so like, if you had random files, like you put to do card.svelte like in your routes folder, then like you could navigate to that page and like see the source code of the website, which is like not necessarily a terrible thing, but not what people want by default typically. And so you could use like underscores in front of things to hide it, but then like everything had to have an underscore. So that's why they ended up going for this. It's a weird choice to be sure, but if you look at like Next.js, they actually do a similar thing in their new routing structure. And all those people work at the same company now, so they all think of the same. Okay, so how do we rip this out into a new component? Let's grab the HTML. And then what we need to also do is grab the CSS that it depends on. So let's go grab that to do. Yeah, we need this. And then we're going to see how the component API works, which is a little bit tricky. So let's just go ahead and add. Okay, so the way you have a component is like you make your own HTML tag, right? Because there's the ones that come with HTML, and they're actually pretty good for if you just need a text box or button or regular things, not bad. But sometimes you need your own thing, like this whole, we want to treat this whole to-do as like one sort of component that can deal with all of its own state and kind of handle itself. So you just make a new file, you add the HTML for it, you add the styles for it, and you add the JavaScript and a script tag. But sometimes what you want to do is basically have arguments to your component, right? And these are called props. And this is every component framework has this. React has this, Vue has this, Angular has this, Svelte has this. You know, all the frameworks have some idea of a component because it's a really useful abstraction. Props are arguments to your tag. And so, for example, like if we look at some of these other things, like class is a prop. This type equals text is a prop, right? It's data that's given to your tag, your component that defines how it works. So if we want to take props, what you have to do is export a variable that will then just be magically populated with the right value. So some people find this strange, but I actually kind of like it. It's because it's like you're saying, okay, here's my component. I'm going to export this to the rest of the world and they can like pass things in as that. So you want to give a string. Say we want to pass a name. We need to, because we need name, right, to be able to render this out. So we do export let name, declare a new variable and export it. If you don't give it a default value, it will be required. So up here, now, if I try to go and use the to-do component, so we can just use it like this. We'll have to import in a minute here. Oh, to-do card. Yeah, to-do card. If you look, TypeScript says no, can't do, right? Property name is missing, but it's required in this type. So if you don't provide a default value, it will make you pass in the prop. And if we pass in name equals, whatever, they'll be happy. If you give a default value here, then it won't warn you about that anymore. But you can still override it if you want to. So if you want to give an overridden value, yeah, you can, but then you'll get a default if not. And I don't know. I actually kind of like this. Some people find it strange, but it is what it is. Okay. So here, what we want to do is pass our name. And Svelte also has a nice shorthand for this. So if you've written React, it's something that annoys me all the time, you often end up writing name equals name a lot, right? These sort of things where you say, okay, the prop is the same name as the variable name. When you have this, you can just drop this part and just do it in curlies, and it knows that it's just a little shorter.
Why did you say that?
It's just when the prop name equals the variable name. So for example, like it just so happens that in our interface, right, in our structs here, this variable is called name. And then in our prop for our to do, it's also name. So these two names are not the same. Like this one is the one from to do card. Right, this guy's from to do card. This guy is just our variable name. Like they could be different. Like if we went here and said, maybe we call this other name, then we would have to do it like this. Right. But in a lot of cases, you end up with it just being the same. And when it's the same, you can drop the name equals. Because it just knows it's the same. All right, and then let's also pass in the is done. So just so that we know. All right. Oh, it's because we're not actually, we have to use this for something. So we have this is done. Yeah. All right. Now we've got that extracted. So let's just go ahead and clone this over up to here because we're doing the same thing here. And let's make sure that nothing blew up. Okay, so this seems to work. Right, so that's how you can make a component. It's very convenient, and all this will end up getting compiled away. So you don't have to worry about, typically you don't have to worry about overhead of having lots of nested components. Sometimes in React or other frameworks, it can be a problem. You have to be like, oh, I don't want to have 8 million levels of nesting because it'll be bad. This is just going to compile out to the tags pretty much, unless you're doing some crazy dynamic things. So make components when you want to. It's great. So let's actually get it so they can go back and forth between the lists. Because this is something of a problem, right? So really the issue they're running into is we have unfinished to-dos and finished to-dos defined, right? This is we already have that set up here. What we're not doing is when the box is checked, this doesn't get changed. Right? So we need to actually update that value in order for everything to get recalculated. So there's different ways we can do this, but going for the unidirectional data flow, the way you implement that in something like React is you would basically pass in a function. So you'd say on checked change, typically you do something like this, right? You pass in a prop that's a function that you will call when that gets updated. And in Svelte, we have fundamentally the same idea, but I really like the way they implement it. They implement it in terms of events. And so that's why you see this on, you have this on syntax instead of it just being like all one word, you have on colon. That's because you can make your own custom events and then catch them with on my custom events, which is really cool. So the way you do this is you get this dispatch function and you have to import this create event dispatcher from Svelte. This allows you to basically send event. It allows you to send data back up the tree, right? Because it's easy to pass data through props down from higher levels into lower levels. But how can you talk back the other way? Well, if you don't have two-way binding where you just update variables and hope people notice, what you have to do is you have to send events or call functions or something. So you create this dispatcher, and then we can use this to send data back. Yeah.
So when you did, people dispatchers automatically imported from Svelte.
Yes.
Is that different? Mine imported from Svelte/type/runtime.
This is a bug. That probably won't work. Yeah, it has to be from Svelte. Sometimes their language server imports it from the wrong place because they must have it internally exported somewhere by mistake or something. I've run into that before. It should be pretty much everything imports from Svelte or Svelte / something. If it's like /internal / runtime / something, it's probably just a mistake. You can check the doc. It's not perfect. Yeah. There's also the extension. Did you have a question or no? Oh, no. Okay, sorry. Okay. Yeah. So make sure it's imported from Svelte. The docs will say this. Also, if you haven't installed the Svelte extension, I didn't bring this up actually, but there's a great VS Code extension or whatever editor you use. There's probably editor support for Svelte, and you'll get nice syntax highlighting for all the things. Like that's what I have here. If you just see it like all in white text, then it's not great. So yeah. Okay. And let's see. Copilot's suggesting this. Yeah, this could be fun. We'll see how far this can go and then we can change if we need to. But what you can do is you can send an object with additional data back up if you need that. So if you need to send some context of like what happened, you can. But if you just want to send an event, you can just use dispatch and then an event. Probably toggle done is that like a great name for it? I would say like maybe toggle checked is a better, I don't know, you can make arguments either way. And then what we'll do is basically here, when there's input on this checkbox, we'll call this toggle. In fact, we could just inline this. There's no reason we need this extra function. Let's do it like this. That's really not going to wrap that. Okay. I think this will work. Let's validate that it works by heading back to our page file and trying to catch the event. So here, let's see, by default, things go into the unfinished. So here we can do on toggle checked, and it's very nice. The TypeScript typings will pick this up automatically. So if you have everything set up, your editor should like just know this is a thing that can happen. And let's just log checked stage. Should change. Yeah. Maybe zoom out a little bit. It's not ideal. Let me just do this so you can see. This probably is too long of one. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we've got that. Let's see if it works. So open up our DevTools, F12. Let's make a thing. Let's check the box. Oh, we get the log. And if we uncheck it more, you see that it keeps going. So now we know we can catch the event. Then what we need to do, what we actually need to do here is instead of logging, we need to actually update that value. So here's the tricky part. We can do this in an index-based way. It's not the worst idea. What you can also do is you can, typically what will happen is you'll have a, if you're working on a real app, you'll have a universal ID, like a UUID or an ID for something that uniquely identifies each thing so that for database purposes already. And you can use that to identify which one, like you can send that in the details. So if we go back to our other file, you can go here and you can send UUID back inside of these details. And then so you can know which one was checked or unchecked. I'm just going to do it based on the index. But if you try to make this like concurrent with like other people editing, then having it based on the index quickly becomes a very bad idea. Because if events arrive out of order and things like disastrous stuff can happen, but it should be fine, at least just get started. And it's very convenient too in these each loops. If you look at all, they have some different forms, but you can just like in kind of like in Python and enumerate, you can get the index like this. So, or no, you're supposed to do it over here. I think that's form. Yeah, each expression as name, comma, index. So we can just do this and we'll be able to get the actual index. And that way we can know, and this will be available inside this each here. So we'll know, okay, when this is checked, we need to go to the to-dos, go to the index is done. And yeah, Copilot knows. Flip that value around. And you might, the reason we need to do it this way, so this is where you're getting into some of the subtle things in Svelte. If you loop over it, if we just did it like this, you might think that we could just do to-do.isDone equals not to-do.isDone. Do these. It doesn't like, oh, now we have to sandwich out all these things back. But they may make this work in this context because it's in each loop, so they might know. But generally doing this kind of thing is a bad idea because as soon as you remove an element from the original like array, it doesn't know to update everyone who depends on that array when you change it. So like if you do, like for example, you can sort of show this with the input. If we make another reference to this input, and then we try to update this, it's not going to like go back through and update the input, even if it's written like this, so that this is dependent on that one. It doesn't maintain that much information about how to, because it would very quickly get very complicated. And it's the same thing in the array. Like if you index a value out of an array, and then you update that, it doesn't know to go back and update the original array. And so one way you can work around this in a lot of cases is like what we had before. As long as the name of the variable appears in the assignment. So you see in this one, we just have to do. The to-dos array isn't there, so to-dos array won't be known to be updated. But if the array, if we instead do by indexing like this, it will know to update it. In this case, it might actually work. So we can try and see. I think each loops, they have a special case for it to like make it extra more better. Let's see, but I don't know. What we should do is add the console log and see. We should just do it the other way is the answer. You might be able to make it work, but it's sketchy at best. It's better to try to do it this way. The other thing, there's other ways you can do if you want to manually trigger an update. What you can also do is like say you know that to-dos, like if we want to use push here, here's one thing you can do you'll see sometimes that people do. So if we're going to push, say we're going to do it like this. If we wanted to use the push syntax instead, this won't trigger the thing because there's no assignment, right? Assignment triggers stuff to be reactive. So you can just do one of these. To-dos equals to-dos. And it looks like a no-op, but that will trigger the reactivity to kick in. I typically don't do this, but if you need to use like the mutable methods like push, or there's some other ones, splice, things like that, and you don't have a good way to represent it without doing that, then sometimes this can be a good solution. So that's that. Okay, let's go back to our code down here. All right, so we've got this, so it toggles the checked Let's copy this and then put it here and see if it works. Oh, we gotta add our. All right. Nope, there we go. It flips over. The state though didn't seem to update, which is not good. That's not good. When we check it, it doesn't seem to check. I wonder if it's because
Creating a new check. So
it's possible. Oh, yes, you can. This is because of lists. So React has this problem too. You have to give a key to each item in your list. And what a key is a unique ID that identifies it. And they do this so they can do optimizations with the actual rendering. So what they'll try to do is reuse, like this to-do card is not a real thing, right? Inside, it's actually just it's a div. So what they could do is generate new divs every time. This is what React will do by default. If you don't do a keys, they'll just regenerate it because there's no other way to know to be safe about it. But in order to be able to reuse it, like we could reuse most of it, all we really need to do is update the name, right? Like 95% of this is the same. If we just update this name, we could reuse the rest of the div. That will save us computation time. And so in order to do that, you need to have a way to track which div is which div, like especially imagine things get reordered. Then how, without like reconstituting everything, how can you calculate like which ones are the same ones? And so the way they do this is you add a key to your loop. So in React, you'll often get a message about like this loop doesn't have, you used to have a list and you didn't include a key. What you do in Svelte to include the keys, you use parentheses. I actually don't like this. I don't know why they do this. In this case, this is another good reason to have a UUID because you'd have a unique ID that you know would be fine. Now, if we have things with the same name, it's going to break, but we just won't do that and it'll be fine for now. Or, you know, we should do, we can just pull in the UUID stuff. It's not that hard. So what you can do is just npm install UUID. Normally, like you get something like this, you can generate it on the front end, but a lot of times, like you could also get it from the back end. So that's another way to do it. But yeah. Let's just add a UUID to this. That will make a lot of our struggles less terrible. So we'll import UUID function. UUID v4 is just a format for UUID. It gives you a like this is a standard node package that people use all the time. It gives you a number, it gives you something that looks like this. And just some random, it's like so many digits of random stuff that like you randomly generate it. The chance that it ever collides with anything is like 1 in 500 billion or whatever. It's not going to happen. So you don't need to worry about collisions. And then let's just add that to here. So say UUID is equal to that. Okay. All right. Let me know if I need to hold up for a minute. And then this fixes a lot of our problems with all this. That's in that. So in the add to dos, the only place we actually generate to dos is add to dos. And so I just added a field that just generates a random one right here. Yeah, no worries. If I'm going too fast, like feel free to let me know. Zoom also. I'm always happy to go back and. Yeah. You can name it differently, but I think this is the naming convention they use in the docs. So it's like that's what everyone does for whatever reason. All right. So look at this. Now we can destructure that off also. And then for our index, we're still getting the index value, but then we're marking that as the key. So that will make sure that our lists behave how we expect and we get maximum performance and everything is just great. We can also, if we want, we can pass this UUID into our to-do, which can actually be useful in here as well. So if we pass this in here, then we can send back the UUID in the toggling, so we don't have to rely on the index. This will get, again, all of this will help in robustness if you wanted to make this like network so multiple people could edit at the same time, because as soon as you try to use indexes as a way to like uniquely identify and things can be reordered or added like by different people over a network, things start to fall apart very quickly. So your database will also be happy that you have a UUID because they typically like to have IDs for things. And so in our, what I've changed here is I've exported a new prop that's taken UUID into our component. And then in here, we can just make a little object of data that we want to send back in our event. So in this check thing, now instead of just sending back saying, oh, the checkbox got toggled, we also can say, hey, it was this particular ID. Then we don't have to do all that weird indexing stuff. So let's go back. So here we can take in the events and our toggle check, take in the event variable. And then we can just do what's the easiest way to do this? Be like to-dos dot find, and maybe find index. Yeah, probably what I would do is like go through each to-do, check when the UID of that, yeah, equals. And so by default, that information you pass back through the dispatcher is you get this event object as a parameter, and then event.detail is that object. Right, so if we go back into here, we passed in an object with UUID. This is really just shorthand for this.
Dispatch is returning an event object.
Yes, and this object will be, this is event.detail is this object. So event.detail.uuid is what we need to get access to that. Okay, so if they're equal, there is a, there's a built-in, if you install the language support and then you just run VS Code formatter, it should do the right thing.
I just noticed you did that. I'm familiar with Python, how you can do a dictionary in Python.
Oh, yeah. Oh, this is like a dictionary in Python. Yes. This, you might be able to just send back a plain value, but it's good practice to send back an object because if you want to send back multiple things. And yeah, so a JavaScript object is very similar to like a hash map or a dictionary in Python. And you can just construct it by using curlies, which makes parsing language actually super hard because lots of things have curlies already, but it's fine. Okay, so pass this guy back out. I thought you meant like how am I formatting the code?
No.
There is language support for that, and it will like make it look pretty. It's not magic. Code formats are great. Okay. So here, what we could do then is basically search through, we can find based on this ID, and then take that element and set the is done. We should just make a bigger function here. Really, probably what I want is the index. So we can find it by index, find where the index is, and then we'll be able to update it. Yeah, this will be the easiest way. So then we can make a clone. Yeah, this is fine. So look up the old. Does this look right? Yeah, this looks right. So basically find the index of the old to do, grab that guy. This spread will basically take all the properties in that dictionary and put them into this new one. And then we just want to redefine, we want to override the is done to be the opposite, that value. And then we can just do an assignment. So and that will trigger everything to get re-updated. And probably we should rip this out because this is kind of a big function to just be sitting in line here. And let's go ahead and add this to here. And we don't need this index anymore, which is kind of a nice upside. All right. And TypeScript's angry. Just say it's angry. Okay. Does anyone need to see any code from there? I know I moved from pretty quickly. Yeah, you don't have to do that, but then you'd have to copy paste into the other one. So it's like, might as well. All right, looking pretty good. Let's see if it works. Oh, still doesn't check. Do we not have the key? No, we do have the UID. Should work. Oh, you know what we don't do is we never set the check state. So we taken is done. Yeah, it's been warning us. We have this unused is done. So inside of here, the way you set that is there's a checked, and you can, this will control if the box is checked or not. So what I'm doing now is because we pass is done into our to do, but then we don't actually use it to set the state of the input box. So you need this checked equals is done. So if is done is true, it'll be checked. If is done is false, it won't be checked. And if that's props again are all, it's all automatically reactive and updated. So whenever those, what you're passing into it changes, it'll update the guy on the inside. All right. Let's try again. All right, so we can add a thing, and when we check it, it goes to the other side. Uncheck it, it goes back. We can add more things. Check it, it goes over there. All right, it's pretty okay, but it's a very jarring experience. When you check the thing, it just kind of jumps to the place in the other one. Everything just shifts instantaneously. Objects in the real world don't move like this. I don't know if you've noticed, but most things don't just magically teleport from A to B with no indication of how that happened. So
Posted
the code, yes, I'll post I can post the final repository. I have one that is already pre-done, but I can also just, I'll post this one that we built here. So if you want to take a look at things after. There's also some things in the tutorial have like, you can find all of this in the docs and tutorial. So not this exact app, but all of these concepts are there. So if you're curious about that, of course. Okay, so things jump around. It's not great. It would be nice if we could have some transitions between items. And this is something that is, I find is super nice in Svelte. So React doesn't, you can use framer motion. There's some things you can do. There's some libraries you can use to help to do this. But Svelte builds in really nice transitions and animations. So what we're going to use is something called crossfade. So you can just import this. Oh, you see I have the bug here. I don't know why it does this, but you import it from Svelte/transition and you get this crossfade. And then to actually set this up, you need to do a little configuration. So you have to do, yeah, send receive equals crossfade. And then you pass inside the crossfade function, you pass an object with some configuration. And one thing you do is the duration. So what duration is a function that you take a distance of how far the object needs to move and then give how long the duration should be. So what this will basically do is like have a nice square root, or like if it needs to go further, it will take longer, but only square root longer. So like not super, super long, but just somewhat longer. And then, well, we can make it better. So what you do is you take this and it's actually, when you call this function, it gives you back an array. The typings are not the prettiest, but the array has two things in it, which we can destructure using destructuring, send and receive. And then what you do is we'll need to wrap these in a div. One downside of this is you can't use the transitions directly on components. You have to use them on an HTML element. So I just use a wrapper div. It has no other really effect on this. And then what you do is you can say, when something comes in, we want to receive it. And if something's going out, we're going to send it. And then inside here, you have to give a key. So this is another good reason to have the UUID handy. And that key will help Svelte know basically when you destroy an element in one place and it reappears somewhere else, that it's the same thing. So, because what's actually happening is it will destroy the old div and create a new div on the other list, but it will make it appear as if it goes between, but you need to give this key so that it knows it's the same. If you like went here and did like math.random, it would completely fall apart because there's no way for it to know what you're sending and receiving. So you say in receive, out send, and then let's put this on the other one. So we need a div here. Grab this. This. Okay. And now we add some items. You see they have a nice little slide. They're still that annoying. We probably should do something so that it's like it doesn't shift when there's no items in one of the lists. It's not the greatest, but yeah, you can have things slide between. And so this is much better. I don't think that needs explanation. It can move between, but it's still not perfect. So if you look, there's still some problems. Like when things move, everything else still clips, right? When you move one thing, everybody else still teleports into the right place. And so Svelte actually allows you to fix this too. So you import something called flip from Svelte animate. And then let's go to under send. Then here you just do animate flip. Let's add it to this one. And now it will animate all the other things automatically. And so it's mainly used for when you have lists, you can use animate flip, and when items move, they'll automatically slide into the right locations to make space for things. And so now this is also a little slow, so you can configure this. So if you look at this, there's kind of like some overlap there that I don't like. And so what I can do is if I want to animate flip, okay, it's a little too slow. We can pass in the configuration and say, okay, duration 200 milliseconds. Let's do the same thing here. That's 200. This guy. Now, hopefully we get a little bit of a better. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And just like that, you can get some really nice motion that is hard to achieve, I think, in a lot of frameworks. Anytime you have things that are moving between stuff, like you can use the send and receive to do the right thing, it's really nice. The last thing you can do is, so when we add items, they just appear, right? So you can normally, if you don't want to use send and receive, there's other things you can do, like you can do in fade. And you can just import a fade helper directly from Svelte, and it will fade it in for you. When you're using send and receive, though, by default, it's going to be like, okay, it wants to get it from somewhere else, but you can specify in your crossfade up here a fallback of something else. So if we want to use the built-in fade, we just have to import that guy from transition. And then provide that in the fallback. And then what this does is if it's not receiving an element from somewhere else, like it's like, oh, where did this come from? It's just brand new. Instead of just doing nothing, it will do whatever your fallback is. And so now when you make a new element, it will nicely fade in. And there's some other interesting ones you can do too. So there's like fly, or that's the thing. It's fly. And I think you have to provide fly. Yeah, you have to give a direction. So like say we wanted to fly in from the bottom, like, I don't know, maybe 400. Let's see. You can have a nice transition that comes up or you know, whatever. So you've got some different options. There's lots of interesting things built in. You can also, if you're into doing this sort of thing, you can implement your own custom transitions that you can use in the same way across things. So you're gonna have some crazy, like I think the docs have this like crazy example. I was like, nobody would ever use this, but it was it was interesting. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, is it custom CSS transitions? I think it was this. Oh wait, you gotta click the show so it goes through. So they define their own custom one, and it's like you can like there you go, and you need that like composable. You want to add that to any element, you can do it. Would you ever actually need that? Probably not, but you can see it being useful for some things. Maybe you want some specific little bit of behavior you want that's not fly or fade. Okay. With that, I think we're getting close to the end of the time. Does anyone have any questions? If not, the last thing I'm going to do is show how you can put your data into a Svelte store, which is kind of the state solution they provide. But if you have any questions, I want to handle that first. No? All right. Let's use a store. So this is there's nothing wrong with doing things this way and just having variables in your main components. But sometimes, especially more complex apps, it's useful to be able to have your state expressed separately from your actual like HTML code. So instead of just having variables just straight up defined in the top of your page component, maybe this is data that doesn't only apply to this one page. Like imagine a more complicated, like maybe you're trying to make a bank app or a stock tracking app. And so sure, like the user's data about what stocks they own or whatever is good on the main page, but there's also nested pages that would also want access to that data, right? And so how can you do this in a good way? What you can do is you can create a store. This is sort of what they recommend you do, and I find it to be very nice. So you can make a stores folder, and again, this is just convention. There's no reason why you have to do it like this. And inside of a store, you can basically you can export like a little piece of state. So let's just give, I don't know, let's just make a counter, which is the most basic example. So the way you actually do this is you import something called writable from Svelte store. And a writable is just, it's a function and you pass in the initial value, and it's just a little piece of state that can be plugged in anywhere in your app. And so we have this counter variable and we can export this. So now let's say we want to, or what we could do is we could have a, let's do this and I'll show you a more interesting example. So if we import this counter here, is that right? No, I tried. Okay. What actually is this counter? So when you make a writable is an interface. It has three functions on it. It has set, it has update, and it has subscribe. If you're familiar with the idea of observables, it's very similar to an observable, like observable.js, or there's some other libraries to implement it. It's basically a piece of data that you can subscribe to, and then you'll be automatically notified when that data changes. It helps you write reactive. It's like reactive state is very useful for. So it's like, okay, you have this counter and we want to have another store that's like double this counter. You can subscribe to the original one, and then when it gets updated, you'll get called so you know you can update or do whatever you need to do. And the way you actually trigger those updates is you set or update. But what's interesting about Svelte is that, so instead of you don't have to use those directly. They provide a very nice syntax trigger for it. So if you want to read a value, like you want to subscribe to something and read the value, you can do that by just putting $1 in front of the actual variable. So you can see this is 0 now. And then if we have, let's make another button. If we want to update that, so what you can do, you can always just say update, you get the old value, and then you return a new value. So we could do this. Say, okay, when this button gets clicked, we're going to update that by taking the old value, adding 1. Or if you just want to set in a hard coded value, you don't care what the old value was, you can do set. But they also give you nice syntax sugar for this. So you can just straight up do and so now that'll update. And if you want to have that render in other places, you can. And in this is a kind of a very basic use case. It's not particularly exciting. You could just do this with a regular variable, but it's very useful for when you want to do something like save your data to local storage. So we don't have time to finish it here today, so I'm not going to do that. But in my other example, which I can put up later, we save to local storage. And so what we're doing is like, say we want to persist data across loads, right? Like there's no reason why every time we refresh the app, like it loses everything. That kind of sucks. Yeah, so you cookie local storage cookie, similar idea. Both ways to store local data. So say you want to stuff it in a cookie or it's local storage. You could deal with that like directly in your code here, like load it out of a cookie when you start up, and then store it back in a cookie anytime you make updates. But it's not the best. It's like you have a lot of things that are tied together. And so what you can do if you use a store, if we move all of our to-do data into a store, you can create a subscription somewhere else in your stores file that automatically will save it and restore it from local storage or cookies, but it's completely transparent to the actual components. Like they're just doing $counter to read. They don't know that maybe it's being read out of local storage. Or when they do an update, they don't know that this update is automatically triggering a write to local storage. And you can even do things like debounce it. So if you don't want to write to local storage on every keystroke, maybe not the best idea, you can set up a debounce so it only saves every second. There's all kinds of really cool things you can do with stores. And so and some libraries actually provide stores. So something I've been looking into is YJS, which is a library for writing basically collaborative editors. And they use basically an interface very similar to this. Like they call it observe instead of subscribe, but they have objects that are very similar, work in this way, and you can actually wrap them in a Svelte store, and you can get a very nice correspondence between that. If people are interested, I could do a workshop on something like that, but that's a little more advanced. I was trying to keep this as simple as I can while still kind of blitzing through a lot of the cool features in Svelte. So yeah, with that, thanks for coming. If there's any questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, have a good day.